we have been having these uncomfortable conversations for a while and wanted to really put that out there to make things better for our kids.
Hey, it's Heather Chauvin, wife, mother of 3 boys, former social worker, breadwinner, recovering hustler, and stage 4 cancer survivor. I'm not a fan of that term, by the way. Beyond all of these titles and labels, I'm a human being, just like you, attempting to navigate it all while feeling good. My goal on this podcast is to show you that you can live an energized, sustainable life both at home and in your work. It doesn't matter if you stay at home full-time, if you work from home, you're a CEO, a successful business owner, or trying to find some inspiration. On this show, I attempt to keep it real with stories, interviews, and random thoughts. This is not a business or career podcast, and it's not a parenting podcast. It's both and so much more. You will laugh. You may even cry, and you may even get a little frustrated with the truth you've been hiding from yourself. I believe all human behavior is a language, whether it's through your child's behavior, your health, or a relationship. And when we learn to listen instead of react, we begin to understand what it truly means to feel alive and in control. It's time to put your big girl pants on and find your brave. Let's go. Change doesn't come from compliancy. It happens when you're uncomfortable. Okay, ladies, I'm back, and today I want to have a really amazing conversation with you. It's Monday, so it's all about podcast interview day. And today I'm going to share the interview that I did with Sara and Misasha. I'm going to introduce who Sara and Misasha are. They are the hosts of Dear White Women. It's a podcast. And I had an aha moment, of course, I've had many aha moments during this interview and conversation, but even just preparing for the introduction of this podcast. When I went on their website, it says, change doesn't happen in compliancy. It happens in the uncomfortable conversations. And that's the same thing about change happens outside your comfort zone. It doesn't matter if you want to change your body, your mind, your soul, your parenting, your relationships, your relationship with money, your relationship with time or energy. Anytime you are choosing to do something different, you will be getting uncomfortable. And I actually reached out, or I had my team reach out to Sara and Misasha this year because I was interested in their podcast. And I was like, well, that's a catchy title. Let's talk about this. And having uncomfortable conversations is where the magic is. And I also want to go on to say that I really enjoyed this conversation with Sara and Misasha. But this conversation is more about race. This conversation is about, race and privilege, but this conversation is about just having diverse conversations, getting outside your comfort zone and choosing to learn something different, maybe learning something different about someone else, maybe someone that you work with or a friend, just asking and having those conversations with people of what was it like for you? Or do you struggle with this? And that is my intention for this conversation. And so I'm really, really excited to introduce them. So Sara and Misasha met over 20 years ago while they were walking out of a racial identity discussion at Harvard. And they've been best friends ever since. They have a lot in common. They're both the oldest daughter in their families. They both have a parent who is a Japanese immigrant, and they've both lived abroad in Asia. They worked in finance, and they both changed their career several times. They both have mixed-race children and are passionate about making the world a better place for their children. So they would have never, they always say they would have never meant if they didn't walk out of that racial identity conversation at Harvard before the conversation ended. So Misasha is a lawyer. She's passionate about law and, of course, social justice. And she has one of the best memories for facts and execution of logic of any person on the planet. And Sara is a trained life coach, author, conversationalist, and she operates more in a positive psychology and well-being space. So even though there are many similarities, there are also differences, and they believe that the little things you do, along with the assumptions you make, have a ripple effect on those around you. So I'm really, really excited to continue this conversation. I highly, highly suggest you go check out their podcast. It's called Dear White Women. You can find them online at dearwhitewomen.com. And just continue to have these conversations, because I guarantee you there's people around you that are having uneducated conversations with discrimination and racial indiscretion, and we need to start calling people out on their bullshit. So let's go, ladies. Let's dial in.
All right, ladies, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Isn't this fun how we can all just be in the midst of our chaos and just put some headphones on and record ourselves and make an impact in the world?
Absolutely. And the reason I like wearing the big headphones is because that way if the kids see me, they know to back off.
Yes.
They can't mess with you when you look like this.
Yeah. I just bought some of those noise canceling headphones. And they're those legit noise canceling headphones. Like you have to touch the side of it to actually allow like the noise in. And I always talk about, I'm like, headphones, earplugs, greatest undervalued parenting tool and strategy. And people think it's hilarious. And I'm not being funny when I say that. I'm honest. Like, guys, if we just tone it down a little bit, then we can stand them more.
See, my kids have a different reaction because my husband has been teaching them how to DJ. So they see these headphones. They're like, it's DJ time. It's party time. It's DJ Black Answer, which is my youngest son's DJ name.
That's hilarious.
And yeah, so I'm not having that same luck. So I'm going to have to work on training them on this front. So.
Oh my gosh. Does he have merchandise in his own YouTube video?
Right.
Channel?
I know. Don't give him any ideas. He would totally do it. He's
my 7-year-old asked, like, Mom, I need some merchandise. I'm like, what did this world come to? But I'm like, it is what it is, right? In my world, it was Tamagotchis and all those things, which are coming back, by the way. I found one in the bookstore the other day. Remember those? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. They're in Target here.
Oh, yeah.
They're Japanese. Of course we know about this.
I definitely tried to keep at least one alive and failed. So, yeah.
Okay. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. A few months back, we've actually already connected and had a beautiful discussion, the little intro that we did have. Where I wanted to have, when I say diverse conversations, which is hilarious because I think we all need to be having these conversations all the time, which was the takeaway. I said, what do you want the audience to take away? And you were like, we need to have these conversations. So your podcast collectively, the both of you are hosts of, it's called Dear White Women, correct?
Correct.
Amazing. So how did you come up with this idea? And when did it start? And what has been kind of your takeaway so far from this podcast?
So I think that it was a long time coming. And I think the name in particular came from Sara's and my conversations after the 2016 election. And we were like, how did this happen? And what can we do about it? Because you sit in sort of anger and frustration for a while. And then you're like, all right, this, for my kids, it has to be better. So we were in particular thinking about a lot of people who had voted in the elections, who had voted for Trump in particular. And the statistic about 53% of white women voting for Trump was really sort of impactful for us because we just couldn't understand that. And so what we thought might change things, especially as we look towards 2020, is having conversations with people who may not have really been exposed or had to even think about different narratives about privilege, about race, about just anything out there that didn't pertain to sort of our American standard narrative, which is largely a white male one. So we have been having these uncomfortable conversations for a while and wanted to really put that out there to make things better for our kids, because, you know, Sara and I are both biracial, and I'll let Sara tell her own story. But my dad is a Japanese immigrant. I'm married to a Black man from Louisiana. We have two very mixed race boys. And what was very difficult for me is when you think about what is your biggest fear, right? And we've talked about this in our previous conversation as well. But what is your biggest fear about your kids? And I think there are so many things to be fearful of these days around your kids. But for me and for a lot of other moms out there, my fear is that my kids, or even my husband, but my kids, will not come home one day. They'll walk out our doors and not come home because they were wearing a hoodie and they were in the wrong place, the wrong time, and someone saw them as a Black man, a Black boy. You know, well, now apparently you don't even have to walk out of your house. You can sit in your house and have that happen, which is terrifying. But if that is not your fear for your child, you should know that there are parents out there who have those distinct fears, and much worse. So to even have the conversation, have the awareness about that we hope will spark some conversation, some change, some more awareness on different levels.
And I mean, for us, you and I, Misasha, we've known each other for over 20 years. We've been close friends ever since we walked out of, ironically, given what we're doing now, a racial identity discussion called the Half Asian People's Association. And we were walking out and we met. And now here we are decades later, you know, not college kids, but now moms. I am a child of a Japanese immigrant, my mom, and then a waspy New England white guy. And I was raised on the East Coast with a lot of diversity around me. But quite frankly, hadn't really, I guess I lived a more white life. And I hadn't really thought about these perspectives until here we are. My best friend has married a Black man, and we are starting to have these conversations. And then the election happened, and we're starting to have these conversations that are seriously hitting home. I love these kids. Her husband is amazing. It became really real. And I realized how little I knew. So then, you know, as I'm having kids and I'm seeing the conversations that they're bringing to me, there was a time where my kid at 2, I think, or 3, was sitting down while I'm cooking, and she has the coloring, you know, Crayola coloring thing, and was coloring stuff. And she goes, "Mommy, can I have the skin color crayon?" And I went, okay, opportunity. You know, this was before Crayola had the skin color set. So I was like, "So what do you mean by that?" And she goes, "Well, you know, those stuff that looks like me." And it was literally, I realized in that moment, there are so many opportunities to have conversations around race. But a lot of times, if you don't have that spark of, we need to talk about this. Oh, look, my kid sees race. We can enter these conversations at any point and not be afraid of them. I don't know. That was just a really eye-opening experience for me, combined with the conversations that Misasha and I have behind the scenes, which led us to do this podcast, which we're really excited about.
Amazing. And how long's the podcast been out?
Since April or May this year? Not very long.
I think. Yeah, mid-April is when we started releasing episodes.
Nice. And what has been the feedback so far from the community?
We've gotten some incredible comments. You know, don't stop this work. Keep it up. It's really important conversation. Stick with it, stick with it, stick with it. You know, because we started it, and then as moms of young kids, we were kind of like, okay, we have this project, we're pre-recording, and we took the summer off. Quite frankly, we're like, okay, we need to spend time with our kids. We've got the episodes out. Let's see if this is a real thing that can continue and sustain within this lifestyle of motherhood. And, you know, Misasha also didn't mention that she's, you know, a lawyer on the side and does all these other incredible things.
Just a lawyer on the side.
That's it, right? And teaches fitness class. I mean, she's a rock star. And so We really
the eye roll. What is with that? Like, let's just talk about women receiving compliments, okay?
No, I was debating how she was going to work that in. I was like, she's totally going to do it. That's okay. I'm going to put your TEDx talk like link right on the bottom too. So
I love it. Where you're like, I'm going to get you back. I'm going to post your TEDx talk.
I know. That's a
I'm going to promote
just a huge thread. I know, right? Like, yes.
This is the downside of what happens when women support each other. You know, all this awful, mutual love and respect.
It is.
This conversation, which I love, is, I think it kind of segues into what I asked you before, where I said, what do you want people to walk away with from this conversation that we're having today? And you said, well, I'm going to kibosh what you just said, but utilizing the narrative, right? Like understanding that there's stories out there. And when we have a majority who's telling their stories or speaking up, it's like, but what about everybody else? Like realizing we all have a story, and race is a big part of stories. So what does that mean for you? So what do you kind of like, not what do you want people to walk away with, but speaking on that narrative piece and understanding that we need to talk about this, especially with our children?
So I have a recent example because my older son is doing a social studies unit in second grade. So part of the social studies unit is this whole paper that you're supposed to fill out about where is your family from. And I hadn't thought that we were going to have this conversation right then. But the thing about our family is that on my side, it's Japanese, Scottish, and English that we know of. But on my husband's side, we can't even pinpoint a country because his relatives were brought here as slaves. So we can say Africa is a continent, but basically from Reconstruction on, we know his family line. We don't know anything before that. And so how do you explain this to a 7-year-old? But the bigger thing that I was thinking about it is after we had this discussion and, I said, well, these are this is your relatives. And he was like, wow, that must've really sucked for them. I was like, correct. It really sucked for them. But it didn't just suck for them. It sucked for a whole bunch of people. But the thing is, he's going to take that. Well, he did take that and go into school and say, hey, this is my family line. This is our native origin. We can't trace it back because some of my family were slaves. So every other kid in his class, of which there are no other part Black or Black kids in his class, are also going to hear that narrative and take it home. And if you haven't started having conversations with your kids about, not even about slavery at that point, because they are young and I don't even have the ability to tell my 5-year-old in real terms what that is like, but about differences in narratives and differences. This is going to be a difficult time to start having it. And so the more you have it, the more frequently you have it, the more age appropriate you have it, you can get it out there. Because what we've heard a lot, I think, is parents say, well, I want to say that we don't see color. And I think that's such a disservice. We both do, because kids see color very early on. And, Sarah's story about her kids seeing color, Sara has a nice graphic that she's holding up, which we have been talking about with teaching kids about race. But, my son had early on another color story as well. He had come home and said, well, I don't think I'm really Black. I think I'm brown, because there's a kid in class who happened to be Indian who's darker than I am. So I think that kid is Black and I'm brown. And I was like, so that's not exactly how colors work. But he was maybe 5 at the time, 4 or 5. And I think that kids see color and they hear us talk about color and race. So the sooner and the longer that we can have these conversations, the more equipped they're going to be going forward.
Yeah. And as a woman, a white woman, saying I don't see color is a very white privileged term to say. Like, I don't see it. I want to avoid it. That is uncomfortable. I don't want to go there. Yeah. I remember I was having this discussion. It was with my husband, actually. And I'm whispering because I always talk about him on these interviews, and I'm hoping he never listens to the podcast, but he is in the other room. And he said, I don't see color. And I was like, do you even know what that fucking means? Like, I don't see it. Like, are you blind? Like, how can you not? It blows my mind. You can't experience it being another quote unquote color, race, whatever, but don't say you can't see it. Like, we see each other. There's judgment and bias constantly, right? Like, it is instilled in us culturally. It's anyways. Sarah, what is this thing you're holding up?
It's like the coolest thing ever because it's a age progression of how old kids are at different stages when they identify race. They've studied babies and they found that at 3 months old, babies look more at the faces that match the race of their caregivers. Children at 2.5, they use race to reason about people's behaviors. They use race to choose playmates. And on this thing, it says expressions of race and racial prejudice often peak at ages 4 and 5. Like, if we don't actively talk to our kids about race and what we believe, they're going to come up with their own conclusions based on what they see in the world out here. And at least in the US, it's not a pretty world right now. It's not a loving, compassionate, empathetic world. That right now there's so much talk about empathy. We must raise our boys with empathy. We want to have empathy for one another. This is an extension of that. It's an understanding of a difference, and especially given the systems that are in play in the United States, it is part of the history and the value system that is placed on people's appearance. And we have to have empathy, not just for the individual, but for all the experience that everybody has gone through. Mm-hmm. So if you don't talk to your kids about it, I hate saying that, they're going to absorb it, and it manifests in stuff like in our local schools. The number of kids who are called the N-word in the elementary school, like every white person I say that to, they're like, oh, it happens. And every Black person I say that to, they're like, yeah, it happens. And it's to the point where even in our local community, we wound up hosting a conversation, being Black in our area. And I had incredible parents who were asking to put this together and wanting to talk to a predominantly white audience in order to say, please, at the very least, tell your kids not to use the N-word, because there is literally no word that can cut down a white person in the same way. It just does not exist. And there should never be a time where a white person ever uses that word, and the kids need to know it. And if you're going to throw that out there, it probably would be helpful to have some context of race conversations before you just say, hey, by the way, this N-word, you've got to talk about it.
This reminds me, or what's coming up for me in what I teach with like emotional intelligence, and how, people are like, my child's so angry, my child's this. And I always bring it back to them. I'm like, if you don't have the tools and strategies to manage your own stuff, how are you going to teach that to your child? So if you don't have your shit figured out, or like you haven't even had this conversation with yourself or even dove into it, how are you going to be able to have that conversation with your child? And your child might be the one that cracks you open to it, right? Because of whatever's coming home from school or how they're interacting out there in the world. So where do you start? Like, what do you guys suggest when you're starting to have these conversations? Because from my understanding, it's not that anyone needs to know. You're just having these curious conversations, like discussion.
I think for us, and my kids look very different than, sort of the white American model. So they were very attuned to their difference early. But what really helped us was books. Books in all forms. And Sarah and I have some great resources that we talk about. We love the Conscious Kid Library. There are so many books out there with different protagonists. And when you really think about children's books, how many times do you see the main character as a white person, a white boy, a white girl? So for me, when my kids were really little, it was important for me to get books in which all sorts were represented, but especially Black kids, because I wanted them to see that Black kids were the heroes of stories, rather than sort of the, the character role or whatever, which is how a lot of times you appear in the media if you're a minority. But I think that's useful for all parents because we have books about kids who are Persian, kids who are Jewish, kids with one eye. I mean, there are so many permutations out there of a different narrative. And the more they hear those stories, the less foreign it seems. This is very relatable and kids love stories. So the more stories that you can read to them about difference, the more open they are to just hearing about that in the first place.
I love it. You'll need to check out Rebecca Barucki. I actually just interviewed her. She has a book actually called Managing the Mother Load, but she just, I think, self-published a few children's books where it was, about a little Black girl learning emotional intelligence and how to manage her big emotions. And I think she has more coming because that's like a huge passion of hers as well. So just like a heads up and to give her that little plug as well. Amazing. I love this. And I was listening to a few of your episodes and you're pulling things. It was interesting. I was listening to some of your stories and I don't even remember the woman's name, but you're talking about an athlete of sorts and
Caster Semenya.
Yes. Like, can you tell this story? Because these are the things that like you never hear in the public. And it's like everything if we're like, oh, that's easy. It's right there. It's right there. It's right there. Like all the censored media, but there's so much happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. So Caster Semenya, well, and also what we love about our podcast is that when you were asking how people respond, people send us stories that they would like us to cover. So Caster Semenya was our very first listener suggested story by my husband's coworker, Kevin, who is a white guy. So that was amazing. But Caster Semenya is a South African runner who is amazing. And the problem that she has been facing is basically her genetic makeup and how when she has been tested by international sporting organizations, they have determined that she has slightly more testosterone than she should have in her body to be considered female. And you can't see the air quotes, like giant air quotes that I'm making in some ways, but yeah. So they have basically been refusing to let her run based on this arbitrary, largely white male body's determination of what a woman is. But the problem that we had, besides just all of what I just stated with the story, is that there are exceptions made if you don't look like Caster Semenya, if you're not Black, if you're not from an African country. Because Michael Phelps, which is someone that we talked about at the start of this episode that you heard, is, the largest gold medal winner in, history, basically in the Olympics, but he has genetic advantages, like half the amount of lactic acid in his body. So his recovery time is twice as fast and his wingspan when he swims is huge. So, however, the treatment of those genetic advantages are like, wow, he's just so amazing at this. Like, we have to support this. Whereas for Caster Semenya, it was like, we can't let her do that. So letting people determine what is female was sort of a larger theme of that, and something that we're going to explore a little bit more throughout our episodes going forward, especially as that is a big issue in our country right now around determining women and women's rights. But that story was something that neither Sara nor I had really known about too before we covered that. So it was eye-opening for us. And we were super excited in our update episode to announce that she's now playing professional women's soccer because they're not going to ban her for that slight amount of testosterone that she has.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing.
Amazing and not at the same time.
Right.
Right. So I have a reason for asking you the next set of questions, so bear with me. But I want to know, what did it feel like for you when both of you decided you were going to do this podcast? Like, did you have any internal struggles? Did you have any, like, OMG, we're going to do this? Did you feel like a personal responsibility? Anything of that nature come up for you?
Yeah, there was definitely are we really fucking doing this? Like, what are we doing? Who do we think we are? We're just moms, but we knew the substance of the conversation was worth having. And it's exciting because we get to learn as we're going along about the content that we're talking about. So for us, at the very least, it's this personal growth experience, and to be able to share that with the audience and interact with more people and get more ideas and grow the conversation has been incredible. I mentioned before the making sure that there was a good balance at the beginning and being able to, take the summers off or maintain the content. At first, for me, I was like, are we going to find the stuff? We literally have our episodes and topics laid out till March, and we have even more that continue to come up that need to be timely. So yeah, there's an element of, can we do this? But now, it's absolutely the right thing for us to be doing. I have no doubt.
So the reason why I asked this question is because I feel like, I'm not really moving away from the race topic, but I'm not moving away from it. I'm moving towards this internal sense of, what do I feel called to do here on this earth? And a lot of times, and I'm like, it's getting darker in my room. So those who are watching the video, hopefully I'm not in pitch black by the time I'm done, but I will be. I think I'm going to turn some lights on while you guys are talking. But anyways, the reason why I ask this is because I hear so many women, regardless of race, background, whoever you are, will even message me and be like, Heather, I want to see more of me. I want to see more representation talking about this in parenthood, or I want to see this and this. And I'm like, go do it. Like, I can't be that. And I just think it's so, so important that, quote unquote, everyday moms, I'm just a mom, I'm just a woman, I'm just a lawyer, I'm just whoever I am, right? Like, we have this, if there's desire or calling inside of you and it scares the crap out of you to have these conversations, then I think we need to be having more of them. So what do you say to that person who's listening, who's like, I want to have these conversations. Yes, they're uncomfortable. Regardless if you're publishing a podcast or not, but what do you say to that person who's like, where do I even begin? And what is your personal opinion on kind of individual purpose? Does this make sense to you?
So let me start with, where do I begin? Because I think that you just begin by talking. There are all those random moments that we have as moms where for me, it's a lot of times it's on a soccer field or a baseball field or whatever, but you're stuck there for an hour. You're making small talk. And sometimes that can change even just what you say, or, you ask a question. That may change things for people. And it's, and then it can be deeper when it's your friends, when it's your book club, when it's people that you know and respect and are open to having deeper levels of conversation. But it's really just getting out there and talking. And I think on the individual purpose, what was driving us also is, and as moms, I think this is something you think about a lot, is what do you want to leave for your children? Mm-hmm. And how do you want your children to see you? And how do you want their life to be? And generally, it's always the answer to the last question is, I want their life to be better than, ours. I want them to be less struggle. So I think for us in doing this, we had a lot of doubt and a lot of, are we doing this? But I think in the end, we looked at what we wanted to do for our children, and maybe not our children, but even our children's children. If there is an openness and a difference and a shift in how we look at race, or how we talk about different narratives, or how we talk about people, or how we look at people, then that's something. And even if, 5 people, 10 people, 20 people have these conversations, it's still 5, 10, 20 more people than that would have had those conversations because they listened to us talk than would have otherwise. So it can be very small. It's so easy to think on the Apple and Facebook and Google levels of change, and if you're not creating an app that's changing the world, then why do it? I'm in Silicon Valley, so I hear it all the time. But I think that the change makers are often the ones who don't plan on being change makers. They just want to start small. They want to, make a difference in their own little circle. So start there.
The little Mother Teresa's of the world.
Mm-hmm.
She always said, start at home. It all starts at home. Sarah, what about you? And don't mind me as I turn my lights on because this is not good lighting. Go ahead.
Purpose is huge for me. I'm in the midst of, Misasha knows this very well, like a lot of reflection on what it is that I want to do, because I have a certain amount of energy as a more sort of empath, sensitive life coach, positive psych, like that's my world. And I am built in a certain way that I need to take care of my boundaries. And so when we were talking about doing this, or when I think about what I want to contribute to the world, I was like, okay, what is my definition of success? What is the legacy that I want to leave? You know, my father died young, the Alzheimer's runs strong. I was literally like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die tomorrow. What do I need to do right now? I got to do it all. And then I got to make a ton of money doing it and prove to everyone that I'm worth it. And I was like, shh, Sarah, like chill out and realize that change comes from within. You have to create silence in yourself to absorb what you're hearing and feeling, and then have that moment of like, I'm choosing this. You know, I'm flipping to embrace this way of living. And so getting rid of the external voices and then just saying, yes, exactly what Misasha said. What is the legacy? What are the things that are within my wheelhouse of strength and passion and joy, if you will, like conversations with my best friend and learning as I go. Yes, that is joy. I love what we do, and I can do this indefinitely. You know, it's very sustainable. And I think finding that place for everybody where you can just have that is, I mean, I'm really lucky.
I love that. And I love what you just said of finding, like, learning with your best friend is joy, because we don't have to be quote unquote experts to start. And the more I dive into these conversations, it's like, just have the conversation. Like, stop trying to prescript it. Stop trying to gather your research. Like, ask questions, ask them often, question things, question why you do things, look at why other people do things. And that's how we expand our mind and open ourselves up to that. That's how we're going to make, like you said, the legacy in the next generation. So what do you ladies think it means to be a mom in control?
What control?
I know. Excuse me, what is that word for? I know. It's great SEO. People are like, I found you because I Googled mom control. And then the first thing I say on the podcast is, it's not about controlling anything external. It's about controlling internal. So what is that? What does it mean to you? Like, or let me rephrase, because that was kind of like a joke. Like, what does it mean to be a mom that's in control? What is your definition of motherhood?
Motherhood as a whole is hard to define, but what I aspire to show up as for my kids is their ally, someone who sees or is curious about their strengths, their weaknesses, their motivations, their desires in life. You know, my kid, and I realized I had totally messed that up a long time ago when one of them sat down and was like, Mom, I can't change the world like you're asking me to. And I'm like, holy shit, did I ask that? I didn't know. I mean, she was like 6. Like, oh, fuck. Like, I totally type A'd her. Like, I messed it up. And then I'm like, I'm sorry, honey. That's really not what I meant. I meant, like, I want you to know you're in your corner of the world. Enjoy what you're doing and leave it a little bit better than you found it.
Yeah.
That to me is your success. You know, and as a recovering type A, like, truly, it sounds sort of obnoxious to say it, but I'm going to be honest. You know, I'm the Harvard, Ivy League, worked at Goldman Sachs, lived in Hong Kong, Tokyo. Like, I've done all the big things that people say are successful. And I've had to cure myself of that disease of having to prove myself for others. And it's really been, that's why life coaching has been my thing, to find my own voice and be this person who really does want to redefine success for us individually, because you don't have to all be that. We can't all do the big picture stuff. We do need people who are doing every range of things that is in their strength in order to make the world, like, to repair it, really.
Love that. Misasha.
So I think what I agree with Sarah that motherhood is a very difficult thing to define. How I see my role as a mother is I have 2 boys. So I feel like I want to be raising the men that I want my sons to be. I'm not raising boys, I'm raising men. And so that informs sort of my thinking. It is a long term, it's a very long range thing. And motherhood for me, when I had my first son, I was working full time at a large law firm. I was a senior associate. And so motherhood was like a bomb had gone off in my life. Like I did not know what was about to happen. It was a huge roller coaster. And so it took me a long time to come to this place of, I'm raising the men that I want my sons to be, because it is really easy a lot of times in the moment to get caught up in, the everyday things, like what are they doing right this second? And like, that's fucking driving me crazy, or like, I'm going to buy them this toy at Target because they'll just shut them up, but there are so many moments in my life. Like I literally had that yesterday during our blackout up here. But I have to take a step back and think about what do I want to teach them so they can be out there as men? Because like Sarah, I want to be their ally. I want to be there for them, especially because I know they're going to face a lot of challenges in today's America. But I want to make sure they can do it, and that I don't have to physically be there with them for that. Like I want to know that when they walk out the door, they have what I've given them on that front, which apparently is toys from Target, but also other things, and the knowledge that they have. That's how I see my role.
I love that. Which apparently is toys from Target.
That too. Yeah. We've got a lot of those.
We all do that. We all do what we need to do to get through the day. So at the end of the day, we're still fighting the fight and doing, creating that legacy of who we want to be. And we have those moments that are not quote unquote Instagram perfect. Right. And I think it's beautiful conversations like this. Go ahead, Sarah.
I mean, isn't that it? It's like none of us we're all mothers are doing their best and want what's best for their kids. And I think motherhood has been the most humbling thing where you realize you can't be perfect. There's no external perfect. Like you show up every day, you do your job, tomorrow's a new day. But that ties back into these conversations where none of those have to be perfect either. It's about building the relationship and opening the communication with all the people around you. You won't do it perfectly. You might offend people, but keep learning, keep growing, keep every day just being like, all right, I'm going to do the best I know how to do today.
Yeah, I love this. And something you just said, I think it was at the beginning of our conversation. No, it was in the midst when you guys were doing your thing. You're like, this is what happens when women empower women, when women help, when women support women. And I think that's so, so important because I think we've lost that with, the village mentality of really supporting people. Like, where's our community, right? We're doing this on an individual basis, but we do need each other. And it represents so much more than motherhood. It's like coming together and having these conversations and continuing these conversations and asking questions and making those connections. We're not having this individual experience. And when we do that, we become very isolated, and we can see what happens when we are living that way. So I'm Canadian, so I'm not going to advocate for anything in American politics, but what I'm going to say is I'm just grateful that more of these conversations are happening. But we don't need to have chaos in order to, it doesn't need to get to a point all the time where we need to fight for our voice. I think we should be able to utilize it on a daily basis. So ladies, any last tidbits of wisdom you would like to part on these listeners?
No pressure.
No pressure. No pressure.
I'm like, oh, okay. Wisdom? I don't know. That's Misasha's territory. I've really, and Heather, you talk about empathy and a lot of your work is developing some of that stuff. I am a huge believer in the science that shows that relationships are the cornerstone of our happiness. And one of the things that we were talking about before, Misasha, I was like, how many people of color who don't look like me do I have in my phone's Rolodex? What are the relationships I really do have? How is it awkward to like reach out and invite the person who looks a little different because you like them to book club? You know, what are the mindful things that we can do in our day-to-day lives? Because quite frankly, there are places where you don't meet. They're very small minority population. You may not have close friends. That may be the reality. And if that's the case, you know, how do you want, just reflecting on how do you want to handle that? And how do you want to handle that to talking to your kids so that your kids are prepared to, I don't know, if they want to move to the big city and they are all of a sudden as an adult, like the number of friends I have who are like, yeah, I was this guy's first Black roommate, you know, and they had no idea what to make of it. That can happen. And so what do you want to do about it? I guess is my question.
Interesting.
I really like that. I also think that when we have talks around privilege or when we have talks about things that bring up painful issues or whatever, a lot of our reactions, natural reactions, mine included, is to get defensive. So I would encourage people, when you start having these conversations, just breathe through the defensiveness for a second, because that is often a barrier to actually hearing the other person, right? And to seek out those conversations with someone who might look different, and recognizing that they're not necessarily speaking for everyone who looks like them, but at the same time, making an effort to listen to what they're saying, because that might raise some questions within you. It might create a great friendship. It just might, it's opening doors and changing things regardless of how small that is. So I would just encourage everyone to sort of listen.
Yes. Listening is a skill and a muscle that can go a long way. What's that quote? Maybe you know it, Sarah, the communicating to respond instead of communicating to listen. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think that's it. The point of communication is for the listener to understand, not to get your point across. Or like, you know, it's not to, that was not the most beautiful quote, but it's the point of communication is to have the person who's listening understand you.
Yeah. It's like to hear, not to respond.
Yeah.
Something.
And how much
we know what we're trying to say.
Do you guys understand? Does everyone get it?
Oh my gosh. Okay, cool. Someone's calling and it's going on my computer. This is like
it's a day.
Chaos. This is like my microphone didn't plug in. The sun was going down. My hair is on point. Look at this. But
it's real life.
This is real life.
It is. My kids are getting out of school early because now there's a crazy blizzard, and we just got notice that they'll be out in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Love it. I might be sitting in the dark in half an hour. Who knows?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, it's been quite the day.
And
for all of us.
And we can still have these conversations.
Yeah, we sure can. I think that's it, right? You just do what you want to do. We can do it.
Exactly.
If you really want it bad enough, you make it happen.
Yeah. So where can everyone find you if they want more of you?
We are at dearwhitewomen.com. as our website, which has all of our information. But if you want to find us on social, Instagram and Facebook, you'll find us at Dear White Women Podcast. And for Twitter, it was just too long of a handle. So we're at DWW Podcast.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies. You are a wealth of information. And I know when they follow you and listen to you, they're going to learn even more. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having us, Heather.
Yes.
According to a study published on Fast Company, conducted at the University of Kansas, women are burning out at an alarming rate, even before having children. And that number rises with the additional responsibility of raising a family. And the gap between ambition and putting themselves in a position for promotion isn't going anywhere. Why, you ask? The world needs more empowered mothers. Women who are willing to unlearn everything that they've been taught. Women who are courageous enough to feel good and not feel guilty for it. I am living proof that you can feel alive, energized, peaceful, and put yourself on your own damn to-do list and make an even bigger impact in your children's lives and those around you. I want to show you how to think, how to act, how to behave, so you can step into that version of you that has been screaming for your attention. And the best part is, all you have to do is take the next step and invest 2 minutes of your time and book a complimentary call with someone on my team to see if my community and coaching is the right fit for your big vision. The relationships you desire, the money, time, and energy that you know deep down you are capable of creating. So head on over to heatherchauvin.com/let's talk. That's Heather Chauvin, CHAUVIN.com/let's talk. LETSTALK. And take the next step in the right direction. You are here because you were born to make a difference. Taking a stand for how you feel means you are taking a stand for how your children show up as adults. You've got this. Let's go.